Some machines carried the muscle car badge with pride, but a few wore it like an empty promise. Today, on American Muscle Soul, we step into the forgotten corner of Detroit's past to face the 20 worst muscle cars ever made, the ones that ran so poorly some folks swear they should never have existed. May this little journey bring you a bit of calm and comfort as you settle in to watch. The DeLorean DMC-12 entered the world in the early years of 1981, looking like nothing else on American roads, its stainless steel panels catching every bit of sunlight, and its gull-wing doors rising with a quiet promise of tomorrow. Yet beneath that striking skin was a machine that struggled to live up to its own legend. The engine was a V6 of roughly 174 cubic inch from the old Peugeot, Renault, and Volvo partnership, a design that offered only about 130 horsepower. When paired with the automatic transmission, the car needed more than 10 long seconds to reach 60 miles an hour, a number that felt painfully out of place for something sold as a symbol of modern performance. The suspension carried the influence of Lotus, but even their engineering could not disguise the weight or the muted response of a car that looked fast, while rarely feeling that way. Its price hovered near $25,000, a figure that implied excitement the DeLorean never truly delivered. By the time the quarter-mile came and went, the disappointment lingered longer than the engine note, and the dream behind the company would fade only a few years later. Even so, the DMC-12 remains a reminder of how hope can outrun reality. And if stories like this speak to you, feel free to let American Muscle Soul ride along with you through a simple tap on subscribe. The 1982 Pontiac Trans Am arrived wearing the kind of sleek confidence Detroit desperately needed. Its body was shaped by the wind, with a sloping nose, hidden headlights, and a rear glass that wrapped around like a visor from some imagined future. It looked fast even when it stood still, a promise etched in steel and paint. But once the key turned, that promise thinned out quickly. The standard engine was a humble four-cylinder of roughly 150 cubic inch, better known as the Iron Duke. It offered only about 90 horsepower, a figure that left the Trans Am gasping for breath each time the light turned green. Buyers who wanted more could choose a 305 cubic inch V8, dressed in the bold words, crossfire injection. Yet even that stronger heart produced only around 165 horsepower, enough to move the car, but never enough to match its dramatic silhouette. Road tests from the era recorded sprints to 60 miles an hour in the high 8-second range, a reminder that the Trans Am had become a showman without a stage. Still, this was the very shape that would later become the heroic face of a certain talking car on television, turning the Trans Am into an icon for reasons far beyond performance. And if this machine ever crossed your path in real life, I would love to hear what you thought of it down in the comments. The Oldsmobile 442 of 1978 carried a name that once roared through American streets, yet by the late 70s, that roar had thinned into a tired whisper. The body was smaller now, its once broad shoulders narrowed into a tidy A. Body shape that looked more like a personal coupe than a muscle car. Stripes and badges tried to echo the past, but they could not disguise the truth that the heart beneath the hood no longer belonged to the legend it claimed to be. The engines told the story clearly. Some cars left the factory with a Buick-built V6 of roughly 131 cubic inch. Others with a Chevrolet V8 of about 304 cubic inch. Even the stronger option could barely manage around 160 horsepower, a number that would have embarrassed the old 442 that once shook the earth with a mighty 455 cubic inch V8. On the road, the newer car struggled to cover a quarter mile in the mid-17-second range, and its top speed brushed only the edge of 100 miles an hour. These were not flaws of character. They were symptoms of an era when regulations and shrinking budgets pressed Detroit into corners it could not escape. Oldsmobile kept the 442 name out of habit or hope, but the badge felt like a photograph from better days, pinned to a machine that no longer remembered how to fight. It stood as one of those muscle cars that should never have worn the title. A reminder that even giants can fade when the world around them forgets what made them great. The 1978 Mustang King Cobra wore its intentions right on the sheet metal. A giant snake sprawled across the hood, stripes wrapped the fenders, and a set of lacy spoke wheels tried their best to give the little coupe some swagger. Yet behind the theatrics was a machine born from the difficult years of fuel shortages and tight federal rules. A Mustang built on pinto bones and asked to carry a legacy it could no longer lift. Its 302 cubic inch V8 offered only a touch more than 130 horsepower, a number that felt painfully small for a car dressed like a street fighter. On the quarter mile, it lumbered through times in the high 18-second range, and the needle strained to push past a top speed just over 100 miles an hour. The numbers were slow because the era was slow, and Ford knew this was the final breath of a generation that had lost nearly everything that made the Mustang name thunder. Even the price betrayed its promise. Around $5,700 when new, the King Cobra was marketed as something fierce, yet underneath it all lived a coupe trying to survive Detroit's roughest decade. Production barely crossed 4,000 cars, a mercy more than a milestone, and the very next year, Ford wiped the slate clean with the arrival of the Fox body. The Plymouth Volare Roadrunner of the late 1970s tried to borrow the glory of a name that once ruled the open highway, yet everything beneath its bright stripes and spoilers told a quieter and far more troubling truth. This was a muscle car born into the harshest years Detroit had ever faced, when regulations tightened, budgets collapsed, and Chrysler struggled simply to keep its factories alive. The platform was the modest F-body Volare, never meant to carry the legacy of the wild machines that had come before it. Under the hood lived a 318 cubic inch V8 that offered only around 160 horsepower. Buyers who reached for the larger 360 cubic inch engine found a little more strength, but even its near 200 horsepower could not revive the spirit the Roadrunner name once promised. On the quarter mile, the car could barely slip past the mid-17-second range, and every test from the era noted how slowly it gathered speed, as if the badge itself weighed it down. The styling tried its best to distract. Slats, stripes, bucket seats, and a spoiler gave the Volare Roadrunner a touch of attitude, yet beneath those bright details was a coupe that lacked the breath to outrun its own shadow. Many joked that even the cartoon Coyote might catch this one, and in a way that humor captured the sadness of a legend stretched beyond its limits. If you have ever seen this version of the Roadrunner out on the street or tucked away in a garage, I would love to hear what memories it stirred for you. The 1978 AMC Gremlin GT tried to bow out with confidence, wearing wide 14-inch wheels, flared fenders, bold striping, and a front spoiler that suggested more strength than the car ever truly possessed. It was the final flourish for a name born from frugality, a small hatchback carved from the old Hornet platform, in an era when AMC was fighting for survival against giants with far deeper pockets. Under the paint and flair lived a straight six of roughly 258 cubic inch, a torque-rich but horsepower-shy engine that produced a little over 100 ponies when the world expected far more from anything wearing the letters GT. It could pull away from a light with a hint of determination, yet the urgency faded the moment the road opened ahead. The chassis, compact and modest, reminded every driver that this was a subcompact dressed for a role it was never meant to play. What made the Gremlin GT memorable was not its speed, but its place in American car culture. For years, the Gremlin had been the oddball of Detroit, appearing in television skits, comic strips, and dinner table jokes about quirky design. And by the time this final version arrived, fewer than 3,000 were built, each one carrying the strange charm of a car trying hard to become something it was not. The 1977 Chevrolet Monza Mirage arrived with the swagger of a race car and the heartbeat of something far more timid. Its white paint carried bold red and blue stripes, the fender flares bulged with confidence, and the front air dam crouched low, as if ready to take on a NASCAR grid. But the Mirage was never a factory-bred performer. It was a dealer creation, born in the uneasy years after the fuel crisis, when style had to work overtime to cover the weakness that lurked beneath Detroit's shrinking engines. The strongest option was a 305 cubic inch V8 that managed only a touch over 140 horsepower. On the quarter-mile, the Mirage drifted into the high 17-second range, and its top speed barely crept past 100 miles an hour. It was a machine that looked eager to pounce, yet hesitated the moment the road opened ahead. Even the price, around $5,000 before the dealer added the Mirage package, revealed a simple truth. This was a cosmetic dream laid over a modest H-body chassis designed for economy, not speed. And while the Spider would rise the following year to claim the spotlight, the Mirage faded almost instantly. There were no great victories, no famous drivers, no stories of glory tied to its name. It stands in this list because it tried to dress itself in the colors of power without ever earning the strength to match them. In a world that remembers true muscle, the Mirage remains exactly what its name suggests: a fleeting vision that disappears as soon as you look closely. The Chevrolet Citation X11 arrived at the dawn of the 1980s, carrying the weight of General Motors' hopes. It was meant to show that Detroit could adapt to a new era of front-wheel drive efficiency. Yet the promise began to crumble almost as soon as the tires hit the pavement. The X11 wore sporty decals, a bolder front air dam, and a dual-tip exhaust that tried to speak the language of performance. But beneath the brighter paint and confident stance lived the same troubled bones that made the Citation a symbol of how far GM had drifted from its own legacy. The high-output V6, of roughly 280 cubic inch, produced around 140 horsepower, and early tests praised its quick throttle response. Still, no amount of tuning could fully mask the problems buried in the chassis. Hard braking often locked the rear wheels without warning, and the car became the subject of repeated factory recalls. Even with stiffer springs, uprated shocks, and thicker stabilizer bars, the X11 felt like a compact car wearing a costume too big for its shoulders. On quiet roads, the car moved with a bit more energy than the base Citation, yet when pressed, the illusion fell apart. This was a sports compact, built in a decade when Detroit was still learning what that term even meant. The X11 tried to shine, but each corner and each recall notice reminded drivers that performance requires more than stripes and a louder exhaust. The 1974 Pontiac GTO carried a name that once shook American asphalt, yet by the mid-70s, it found itself trapped in a world where fuel shortages and emissions laws had stripped Detroit of nearly all its bravado. Pontiac tried to keep the flame alive by shifting the GTO onto the compact Ventura platform, hoping lighter weight might disguise the shrinking power beneath the hood. Its engine was a 350 cubic inch V8 producing around 200 horsepower, a far cry from the mighty mills that once made the badge famous. Quarter-mile times stretched into the high 16-second range, and the top end crept only a touch past 100 miles an hour. Drivers who remembered the deep surge of the old tri-power cars could feel the emptiness in this one, the way each gear change lacked the punch that defined the first decade of the muscle era. A fixed hood scoop tried to echo the iconic shaker of earlier years, yet it sat there, unmoving, a reminder of potential the car no longer possessed. Even the cabin felt more Ventura than GTO, practical and restrained, missing the purpose and attitude that once set these cars apart. Only a few over 7,000 were built before Pontiac quietly set the name aside, leaving behind a version of the GTO that struggled to carry the weight of its own history. The 1980 Mercury Capri Turbo RS tried to blend European sharpness with American attitude, yet it arrived in a decade when neither side of its personality had the strength to carry the other. Built on the new Fox platform and sharing much of its structure with the young Mustang, the Capri wore a softer, rounded profile, a long hood, and the bubble-back glass that made it look quicker than it truly was. Its front air dam and slim hatch gave it a hint of racing intent, a promise whispered through styling rather than substance. Beneath the hood sat a 230 cubic inch four-cylinder with a small Garrett turbo feeding it breath. On paper, the engine made a little over 130 horsepower, but in practice, the boost came late and unpredictable. The driveline felt jittery when pushed, and early owners learned quickly that heat and hard use often brought out the worst in the motor. Quarter-mile times drifted into the mid-17-second range, and the top end barely crept above 100 miles an hour, numbers that placed the Capri Turbo RS firmly in the shadow of the machines it tried to imitate. Yet there was something undeniably curious about this car. It was one of the first Fox-body turbos, a strange branch in the family tree that Mustang fans still mention with a half smile. And since you have journeyed all the way to this point in the list, I am truly curious whether this odd little turbo has ever crossed your path. If it has, feel free to share a memory so I know you are still riding along. The 1980 Chevrolet Corvette California 305 carried the unmistakable curves of the C3 era. Yet beneath that familiar shark-like silhouette lived one of the weakest hearts the Corvette name had ever known. The decade had tightened its grip on every performance car in America, and California's emissions rules were the strictest of all, forcing Chevrolet to fit this version with a 305 cubic inch V8 that produced only around 180 horsepower. The heavier C3 body asked for far more than the engine could give, and each press of the throttle made that gap painfully clear. Quarter-mile runs drifted toward the mid-16-second range, a number unthinkable for a Corvette just a decade earlier, and the 3-speed automatic dulled whatever eagerness the small block tried to muster. Even the non-California version, armed with a slightly larger 350 cubic inch V8, barely touched 190 horsepower. For buyers in the Golden State, the privilege of owning this subdued machine came with mandatory emissions certification, a reminder that performance had surrendered to regulations that reshaped the industry. The car still looked the part with its long hood, its flowing Coke bottle lines, and its low stance, but the sound and strength that once defined the name were gone. In a time when the Corvette had been a symbol of American muscle, the California 305 stood as a quiet moment of compromise, a machine built to survive rules rather than break limits, leaving behind an image that promised far more than its restrained engine could ever deliver. The Ford Maverick Grabber of the early 1970s carried the look of something bold, yet the truth beneath its bright colors and dual-dome hood was far more modest. It was born from the compact Falcon bones, designed to be affordable and simple at a time when Ford needed a small car to fight rising imports and new emissions rules. The Grabber package tried to add a spark of muscle with stripes, spoilers, and an attitude drawn more from imagination than engineering. Under the surface, most Grabbers carried the familiar straight six, an engine that offered honest reliability but very little excitement. Even the optional 302 cubic inch V8, which once produced a spirited 210 horsepower in its early years, would shrink to barely more than 120 as regulations tightened. The drop in performance left the Grabber with the stance of a street fighter but the punch of a commuter car, a combination that frustrated drivers who expected something closer to the fire of Ford's true performance machines. Inside, the optional luxury decor option softened the cabin with vinyl and wood grain, a curious contrast to the sporty graphics outside. It made the car more comfortable, yet it also reminded everyone that this Maverick was built to be inexpensive first and exciting second. The Grabber earned attention for its style, but it struggled to deliver the strength its appearance suggested, leaving it suspended somewhere between a playful compact and a muscle car impersonator that never quite convinced anyone who slid behind the wheel. The Pontiac Tempest of the late 1960s wore the same Coke bottle lines that made so many GM cars look powerful, yet beneath those curves lived one of the quietest engines in the entire Pontiac stable. It shared the A-body with the Le Mans and the mighty GTO, but the Tempest was built to be the affordable choice, a car shaped like a muscle machine, but powered like a daily commuter. The wide fenders and narrow waist suggested speed, though most cars carried the gentle 250 cubic inch overhead cam 6, an engine known more for smooth manners than strength. Even the available 350 cubic inch V8, rated at roughly 250 horsepower, struggled to give the Tempest real presence on the road. It could move with confidence in town, yet the moment the highway opened, the gap between image and reality became impossible to ignore. The newer 3-speed turbo Hydra-matic did its best to sharpen the response, but nothing in the drivetrain could change the fact that the Tempest was never engineered for the kind of force its styling promised. By the time Pontiac discontinued the model in 1970, the Le Mans had fully taken its place, and the Tempest became a reminder of how a car can look every bit the part, yet lack the muscle that its silhouette implies. It stood between categories, dressed like a contender, but carrying the modest heart of a machine, built for ordinary days, rather than thunderous ones. The 1982 Chevrolet Camaro, fitted with the Iron Duke engine, looked every bit the part of a modern pony car. Yet the moment the key turned, the illusion unraveled. The third-generation body sat low and sharp, its wedge-shaped nose and sweeping glass promising a leap into a new era of speed. But under that sleek surface lived a tiny 251 cubic inch four-cylinder built not for power, but for fuel economy in the tight years after new emissions rules reshaped Detroit. The engine made only about 90 horsepower, a number that left the Camaro struggling to reach 60 miles an hour in well over 17 seconds. On paper, it was the slowest Camaro ever sold, and on the road the car felt like a thoroughbred, forced to jog with weights strapped to its legs. The 3-speed automatic softened what little eagerness the motor had, and each run through the quarter-mile drifted into the high 18-second range, far beyond what anyone expected from a car wearing the Camaro nameplate. Inside, the cabin carried the clean lines and optimism of the early 80s, and the chassis itself had potential, light and responsive, compared to the generation before it. Yet none of that could overcome the simple truth that a pony car without real muscle becomes something else entirely. The Iron Duke Camaro stood as a moment when economics and regulations pushed style far ahead of substance, a reminder that even the proudest names can falter when their heartbeat is too small for the body that surrounds it. The AMC AMX from 1968 to 1970 was a machine that deserved far more love than the market ever gave it, and that lack of recognition is exactly why it finds its way into this story. It carried a short wheelbase that made the body feel tightly wound, almost like a spring waiting to be released. Beneath the long hood lived a 390 cubic inch V8 with well over 300 horsepower, an engine with enough heat to chase far pricier cars through the late 60s twilight. On a good day, the AMX could launch to 60 miles an hour in a little over 6 seconds, quick enough to make rival owners raise an eyebrow. Yet performance alone could not save it. Detroit still believed muscle cars needed 4 seats, and the AMC badge lacked the marketing power of the Big Three. The very thing that made the AMX special, its 2-seat layout, also pushed buyers toward larger and better-known models. Even as engineers earned awards and praised its balance, the public drifted elsewhere. The styling was bold, almost European in its proportions, but the industry was shifting, insurance costs were climbing, and the era of short-wheelbase performance coupes was fading fast. So the AMX became a rare chapter in American muscle, a brilliant car caught in the wrong market at the wrong moment, remembered today not for failure in engineering, but for how easily a great idea can slip through history's fingers. The 1976 Chevrolet Chevelle Laguna carried a name that once meant raw muscle. Yet by the time this version rolled out, the world had changed too fast for it to keep up. Regulations had squeezed the life out of big engines, and the Chevelle that once thundered down boulevards now rode on the heavy colonnade body, a platform built for comfort rather than speed. The Laguna still wore its rounded nose and sweeping lines with a certain dignity. But beneath that familiar shape the fire had faded. Most cars left the factory with engines that barely whispered of performance. The straight six offered just over 100 horsepower, while the small block V8s, 305 and 350 cubic inch, could muster only the low 100s. On the quarter mile, the Laguna drifted into the high 18-second range, and the top end leaned around 100 miles an hour, numbers that would have been unthinkable in the Chevelle's earlier years. The automatic gearbox softened everything even further, turning each acceleration run into a slow sigh instead of a shout. Inside, the Laguna leaned toward luxury with thick seats and broad panels, a hint of the era when mid-size coupes tried to become personal living rooms on wheels. It was a long step from the snarling Chevelle SS that had made the name famous, and for many enthusiasts, this version felt like a memory carried forward without the strength to honor it. In the end, these machines remind us how easily a great name can stumble when the world around it shifts. The stories may feel strange, uneven, even disappointing, but they are all part of the long road that shaped American performance. If you enjoyed this journey through the missteps and misfires of the muscle era, give the video a like and subscribe to American Muscle Soul so you never miss the next chapter in this history we all share.